Hey everyone, Conrad here. Welcome back to another episode of the Well Aware Podcast. Today I'm with arguably one of my, if not my closest friend from college, who's also been my fractional CTO for the past several years, Benjamin Bianchi. A little bit about Ben before I let him introduce himself. I can't begin to unravel, and that's partly why we're here today. I can't begin to unravel just on my own what makes Ben such an amazing person to talk to when it comes to technology, when it comes to making decisions as a business about technology. I think the word that I always come back to, and the word that frankly Ben uses on his own, is pragmatic. Like he's very it's just such a delight to have someone be able to speak to you in plain English. And yet at the same time, the plain English they're explaining is clearly something that's a lot more complicated when you start to sort of look at the actual technical nature of what it is. And yet that's like that in conjunction with, hey, I'm telling you what you need to know and I'm telling you what you need to, consider doing, all wrapped up in, all right, I know this is very complicated and there's a lot of things to account for, but this is what I need you to know and this is what I need you to make decisions. Anyway, I'm doing an injustice already. Ben, welcome to the Weller Podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. Please, tell the world a little bit about you.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you said a lot of really nice things about me. I'm blushing a little bit here, but yeah, I've been really interested in software ever since I was a little kid. For anybody out there, I used to mod video games like Halo and Fallout and Warcraft 3, and that's slowly but surely evolved into something that I became more, I guess, in the form of software engineering. So I went to school with Conrad at Worcester Polytech, ended up working for Wayfair, working for Amazon for a couple of years, now doing a little bit of contract work by myself. And in sort of this contract work, I've been helping Conrad with it. For me, I think it's really important to be, when you're working with someone like Conrad, who is less technical and has more of a product vision, to be more of the way. You have to basically show them the way and give them the roadmap to what they want in terms that they can understand. So my what I pride my service on is that I will try to think ahead and think in the future, and I will make sure that when I identify a risk or something like that, or maybe you know something that may change in the future, I talk to my client like Conrad and tell them this is what's going to happen, this is what it really means in language you'll understand, not some esoteric technical language, and then we work together to understand what is the direction we should both take what direction we should go through, but make that a joint decision.
Ben, I think in hindsight, we've had plenty of opportunities for hindsight over the past several years working together. It has been, again, a joy and a blessing to be able to look back on some of the things that you forewarned me about and to be able to look back and go, yeah, I knew less than I did now. But even then, you were still giving me the education and insight into what it was I needed to make a decision on then, such that when we looked on it in the more recent time, it became clear that that was the right decision, or that was the right decision at the time, but now we need to do something different. And so we can sort of make amends on that choice in that moment. And again, there's so much richness in that I just do a terrible injustice of maybe, trying to explain in a summarized fashion. But why don't we, because we have the time, I would love to try to sort of kick back some nostalgia with you and kind of take us back to the early days when we first started working together. For those of you who don't know, the project that I've had Ben working on with me is called In the Loop, and it is an introduction management software application. I am a very obsessive network, just to give you a little bit of background. I love making introductions. I love connecting people. Ben has been the recipient of many an intro on my end. And I've always tried to like obsessively tell him like, dude, this is like 90% of business is referrals, it's warm networking, it's getting introduced to people who, are already know, liking, and trust people. And that's such a huge component, right? So as I was talking with him about that, I want to say even well before I started even looking into working with Ben, I was already a supremely novice business entrepreneur, especially in the sense of software as a service. I knew the basics from a business standpoint, but I had no technical background. I had at the very earliest stages of this sort of product vision, I had another technical co-founder at that point, and we were working together on a no-code solution to creating this application. And long story short, and I can speak to this in ways that extend a little bit above and beyond just what Ben has ultimately brought to the table in terms of development. I'll talk a little bit about product management, UX, UI design, because those are the other two pieces to this little triangle, if you will, as far as I've come to understand it. But needless to say, that particular relationship dynamic and that pursuit of success failed. And it failed for a lot of different reasons. But on the development side, no less, it failed because, and I don't know how else to put this, but requirements were unclear. Designs were not fleshed out in advance. But most importantly, from a development standpoint, expectations on what was the definition of done from a development standpoint were also unclear. And then when they were found to be met with challenges, with bugs, with issues, there was no clear scope of work designed around solving those issues. I'll sort of leave, that version 1 of In the Loop as a failure across the board. So then, I think if I recall correctly, Ben, I at some point, besides just blurting out the mountain about how much I love introduction management, at some point you and I were having discussions along with another good close friend of ours, JT, I was asking to kind of help step into my role to help facilitate some of the product management side of things. There's going to be a whole episode with him coming up soon. Between you guys, I started to really get immersed, and frankly, I objected at first. I remember about this idea of like stepping away from a no-code application approach and instead going down what we'll call the more traditional custom software development. And I think if I remember distinctly, it was both you and JT telling me like, "Hey, man," excuse me, the cat. You guys are saying like, "Hey, Conrad, like this project and what you're envisioning, as far as we understand it, like we'll get here and we'll start to drill down like what exactly your needs are and what you're expecting." But all of that, there's nothing wrong with trying to go down the custom route for this. And here are some of the things that you can benefit from by building in this way. And that's when I believe the initial conversation, that was like the first hindsight long-term conversation that you guys gave to me. And Ben, please feel free to share what you saw on that when that first sort of kicked off that relationship of ours.
This is pretty interesting because I remember trying to convince you not to build it yourself as well.
Yeah.
I said, don't do it, because if you can find a bunch of different tools to string together, it's going to be cheaper to do that. And there are a lot of hidden costs in software. It's a bit of an iceberg. So at the top, you see having a product, but you don't see the entire process of building that product, pivoting. Let's see, what else? Maintenance issues, migrations because something new has entered the system that you have to deal with, or some new requirement has entered. But yeah, a lot of these no code solutions, they're really great because what they do is, in software engineering, whenever you have a deliverable, it's always best to stage it into phases that deliver value at each phase. And it's important to know when to quit. So these no code solutions, like the one you had, I'm pretty sure it did a little bit of what you needed to do. And that helped you vet the process, I should say, vet the experience and vet the value that it gives to your customers. But then, because you lose a lot in a lot of software, you lose a lot of customization or lose a lot of the ability to choose your own path when you use tools that are given to you. Similar to one of another experience we're probably going to talk about, where we use something called Amplify. When you're doing these sort of things and you're going off the beaten path of what the developers of that product, i.e., what was it, like a bubble or something like that? If you start going off that path, you quickly realize I need to have my own custom tailored, or what's the word, bespoke solution for this.
And I think on that note, at some point I finally gave in. I said, all right, guys, what is it going to take to go down the custom route? And initially what I was surprised by was just how little I really understood about how to even set the expectations for what I was looking for and set those requirements. There's another unspoken hero here that comes into the fold after JT and I initially sat down and as him acting as my product manager and going like, all right, Conrad, I'm going to organize everything you actually care about when it comes to what this software is supposed to do. And we're just going to write it all down and organize it and database. It's going to be in this entire information management system, but it's going to be really easily accessible. And it's going to be easily communicable to, as I like to put it, the stranger in the strange land who's just coming in and going, what do I need to know about this software project, how it's built? And I've got a whole time block dedicated to just talking to JT about that. But needless to say, once we covered into that, we were also at that same time communicating with you about, hey, based on the expectations we have about what we would like, what seems reasonable? What should we expect? There is an intermediary here again, which I'm going to unfortunately have to skip out and kind of say, all right, let's just skip to the development part, which is the last thing we're supposed to do technically. But in between JT's PM work and your development of Loop at the early stages, there was a bit of UX UI design conversation involved. Huge shout out to our other good friend, Czar, for participating in that. Also a huge shout out to Daphne because she was technically, I think, Czar's first hire. And she had participated effectively in the on the back end on Czar's behalf with creating a lot of what we have now seen as like Loop MVP. But it was through those two things, through PM work and through UX UI design, that was all fleshed out and clearly established. To some degree, we have some hindsight on that. We then came to you and said, Ben, this is what we think we're building. And then from there, you were like, okay, great. I'm going to start building stuff. So let's kind of open that that particular timeline period, and I would love to just kind of catch up with you on like where that whole relationship started, when you actually started getting your hands dirty with development work.
Yeah, so for me, I've been a backend engineer for my career at Wayfair and AWS, Amazon AWS. So I had to ramp up on how to integrate with things like Google, which was kind of, I definitely made some mistakes there, which we had to remediate later. I also figured if we were trying to get to production as fast as possible, I was thinking there was a toolkit out there called Amplify that we decided to use because it helped us get to the finish line as fast as possible. I'm sure later in this conversation, we're going to discuss why that was a good idea and why it was a bad idea. It's a double-edged sword. I do remember Czar did a lot of the work and owned the middle ground by taking a lot of these experiences that you had enumerated with JT and he did solidify a lot of them in the screens that he created. And I remember walking through with you and Czar on a call and seeing, okay, this is what this screen looks like. Okay, this button does this. And I think he did a really great job of exploiting what I call exploding out the cardinality of how these components work, how introductions are going to work, and gave us a really great baseline for us to start working, even if everything wasn't solidified. 95% of things were solidified, which basically allows me to start going and building out the platform or the framework we're going to use to solve this problem. And although we may make a couple decisions, like we made a couple decisions where the implementation or the technology was incorrect, we still had basically the changes we needed to make when these things changed, these requirements or whatever. They were minimal.
I found it a very helpful hindsight detail, especially now in this particular moment in time where just as we've released the first version of Loop, we specifically made an earmarking point for Daphne on the UX UI side to like, please take everything that we currently have and mark it as foundation. It was a funny and interesting way to look back on how Czar had put together a lot of the ideas for how Loop was supposed to work, which if I had to throw a percentage at it just to throw something at the wall, I'd say he got 90% of it. Yeah. But what was interesting was that 10% remaining was both things that we had not accounted for but should have, and things that we didn't account for but we liked, and so we, they were kind of like superfluous. They were extra. They were added to the scope, and they made sense because Czar is very creative and he understood sort of the forest through the trees on like what we were building. He didn't just deliver on what we asked. He really thought about what it was that we were asking for and tried to create an experience that was complete. But then we had to go back into PM mode for a little bit. And unfortunately, we didn't do this until much later when we actually realized what we had missed from what Czar had created. And because of the disjointedness that had on your success as a developer, it brought so much clarity to light about like, you operate exactly as you expect. I know that sounds odd to put there, but again, it's this is the pragmatic, like what you see is what you ask for is what you will receive. And it becomes a very interesting question. It's like, well, what exactly are you asking for? Because on one end, based on Czar's designs, we're asking for X. Based on we're asking for X, Y, Z. But maybe in our requirements section, we only covered X, Y, right? And we missed a little detail here. And it's funny because every little detail matters. Like you can't take any little piece for granted. It all has to be accounted for, or it's going to be missing.
Yeah, I want to definitely give Czar some credit here. He took what we were saying and he extrapolated a lot. And those extrapolations helped you to realize what questions you wanted to ask, and even gave you really good solutions. I'm pretty sure he like took the ownership of a couple of gray areas or fuzzy areas and produced an idea, a concrete idea that I don't have a good example here, but I remember you said something like, I didn't think about that, but that's how that should work.
Some of the simplest things I remember were like, I want to be able to X out of this modal. I want to be able to go back to the previous page I was on. When I click on something, I want this to be a drop down. Little considerations that, again, if you were and not to put any harp on JT either, because like it was like, these are the requirements. Okay, well, how do you want to fulfill these requirements? Okay, well, that was, that's where sort of the open interpretation comes. That's where some of the open interpretation comes in when you're sitting down with the designer and saying, this is what I want. This is what I kind of wireframed. Now, can you make this come to life? And then what sort of creative taste do you want to bring to the table? Right.
Conrad, I have to interrupt you here, but think about this though. This is the first time you've ever built a tech product, right? I know so many entrepreneurs who have done tech before, have a technical background, and their sort of what we want was way more bumpy than what we decided, or our process. It was our process, when we had everybody in the room together, was pretty easy and everybody could be direct. There were no hard feelings about anything. It was all in the context of what is the best for this product and or Conrad.
I have zero regrets. I've learned a ton, and I realized that for the uninitiate, there is a lot to suddenly become aware of, frankly. And I know, per our custom, I should be having a mug nearby so I can drink. But the way that all kicked off was, again, both an incredibly like anxiety-driven experience because we actually started to have something built, and that I think uncharacteristically to the no-code bubble solution, it's hard to see all the stuff that you were working on just to set the foundation of the product, right? I sometimes have to take for granted how much of the front end I only see and how much of the back end I don't even engage with or even think about or consider. You brought up Amplify, and I think we deserve to give that the sort of the timeline of credit that it was, because I think that kind of brings us into us stepping away from here's the foundation of In the Loop, and now we needed to start building things out. And you at that point, again, as you brought up earlier, there was a production speed value that came with, okay, what can I take away from what's available and just start making use of it? What sort of hindsight would you like to share on that at this time?
Yeah, so there are some things I think we did really well. So Amplify got us to a moderately working solution very fast. Amplify closed us in on some things that was really bad. I'll give you a good example here. Amplify, at the current stage we adopted it, or at the stage in time that we adopted it, did not allow us to pursue best practices where in software engineering, when you define something, you never define it again. You just use that definition. And unfortunately, with Amplify at that time, we would need to copy and paste code. And this is a very, very, very bad thing to do. Because if you need to make one change, you have to make it in 10 places, and good luck making sure you remember everywhere. Amplify gave us a lot. It was a little confusing, but it did give us a lot, and it got us to production. There are some things that, one thing I I really was. I think that we really did a good job of it. Was maybe later on in this conversation we'll talk more about that. We've had different people help us with this project. We've brought in some engineering from different places. One thing I think is really important is, maybe I failed on this. When you add a technology to a product, you have to understand what is the pool of people that I can hire that can work on that technology. So Amplify was a little bit of an issue with this, where it had a dynamic that you had to work with that was a little bit strange. Let's just say unorthodox.
And
So,
at best, you almost required slash desired talent that had familiarity with that unorthodox behavior.
or you'd have
And
to train.
right, and that brings you back to, I mean, I deal with this problem all the time in, my general day-to-day role of operations and virtual assistants. It's like, I don't want to participate often in an operation that's so exclusive and so unique, because how transferable is that skill set? Both if I'm bringing someone new into it versus if I'm trying to give someone else that same adoption. Like, how difficult is it going to be to have to learn something so brand new, even if you are within the general scope of skill sets for this particular department, which in this case was, software engineering.
Yeah. But one thing I think we did do was a lot of the engineers gave us feedback about this is not scalable. And we did respond, what do you mean not scalable? And I think Conrad, I want to underscore this because this is very important to surface to anybody who's going to see this. Show me why it's not scalable. And the answer is we never got a real answer. We just got what effectively turned out to be, I don't like working with this product.
Right.
Right.
It's not scalable for me.
That's fine. But that's so
And that's a good answer to get to the bottom of, right? Because it tells you a totally different type of problem.
right. But I would say in software engineering, there is this thing called like shiny syndrome or something like that, where this isn't shiny. I want the newest and shiniest thing. And then we decide to pivot and spend a lot of time moving to that new shiny thing. And I think, we got some recommendations to move off of AWS to something like Vercel or other things like this that are not in our wheelhouse and have what I believe is like a talent pool that I don't think is as big as AWS.
Yeah. No, and you're right. That's again, I think about this a lot of a time in like project and task management world. Everyone's like, "Oh, you should check out ClickUp. It's really amazing." I'm like, I understand that it's very versatile, does a lot for me. If I want to succeed in it, especially if I'm trying to scale an operation within it, I'm going to have to find talent that knows it. And maybe ClickUp's not the perfect example, but still, I could make the argument: am I getting all the things I need out of ClickUp versus using a different project management system like Asana? One of my favorite lessons in software as a service is, your greatest competitors Excel. How far can someone get away with the spreadsheet before they really need your system?
Yeah.
And what are the true transition costs at any point in that process?
But Conrad, I think we did a really good job. When we got that feedback, when we said, what do you mean? Then we got this sort of nebulous feedback of it's not scalable, to say, listen, there is no reason for us to pivot. That is not a reason for us to pivot. And we didn't. We then realized there is a reason for us to pivot, and we pivoted. But I just want to make sure that like the people who see this is always make sure you ask, like, for real data, like, why do we need to switch off of this thing? Because the more you drill down, the more likely you're going to be able to understand, is this because my talent doesn't know this software stack? Is this really going to prevent me from reaching new customers in the future?
Right.
Is this going to prevent me from shipping fast? Is this going to prevent me from deploying to a new geography?
Again, going back to what I appreciate about working with you is that, number one, I've had a wholehearted level of trust in your technological thinking and logical reasoning since day one. And so if anyone were to question your logic, they better be prepared for a debate with that, or at least they better be prepared to be very convincing in whatever decision they're trying to make on behalf of me, frankly, at the end of the day, as you so aptly put it. Like, I'm ultimately the decision maker here, and every decision weighs most heavily on me. Or at least on the product, my company. Cool, got it. With that in mind, it's been very compelling of an experience for me to be able to realize that you're looking out for those types of questions and those types of challenges to directions that are being proposed when I myself lack the wherewithal to recognize that these are majorly impacting decisions, majorly proposing directions. I might be even sold to them that they are not as difficult or as challenging or as complex as Switch, and yet you have the means to say otherwise. Or you have the means to align with that truth and say, yes, that actually is the case. This isn't such a big deal. I try to use one of my my myriad analogies of finding someone who's like a fish out of water, essentially.
Mhm.
Or in my case, I always like to say I don't expect fish to climb trees. Because in my case, if I'm a fish and I know how to swim in these general waters, like if a person came over to me and asked me about general business operations decisions within a marketing, sales, service delivery, like a general framework of like the common elements of business operation, I'd be like, hey, I have some thoughts, comments, and questions and concerns and things that I might want to, based on experience, tell you that from a systematic design element, a component that I would express caution here, or I would say this is a reversible decision and not such a big deal. So if you don't like it, you can always switch back. I can't do that with software. I don't have the means to, but you do, and I trust you, and you've been able to tell me, hey, flag, come take a look at this. Let me explain to you why this is important. Again, without overwhelming me in the sense that I'm learning about things that I'm never going to really fully understand or comprehend in totality. You're just trying to give me the brass tacks, and that I can appreciate.
Well, knowing when to communicate, I think, is very critical. For an example, when I was at Wayfair, I had a boss, or there was this guy in the management chain who gave me some really good advice, and that was, I can only understand, or I can only remember 10% of what you said. So make sure that 10% is super critical, right? And then he said, by the way, my boss can only remember 10% of what I said. So it's like, what is that? That's an exponential decay or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's all I have aimed to communicate with you. I don't think you need to know if I use an array list versus a list. You don't care about that. I think what you care about is, Conrad, we're going to be doing something that paints us into a corner. I worked at Amazon, and there are a lot of really good terms that I learned. They call it a two-way door. Two-way door means I can go in and out of this decision. I'm going to tell you if I need to make a one-way door decision. If we go in and there's no going back, you need to know, and you need to know, what are we going to miss out on doing this?
Right. The real opportunity cost.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to go back to timeline for a minute. We had this long stretch. Now, granted, I remember this was during the time in which, you weren't available 24/7, or at least I've never had you 24/7. So I've always had you as a fractional CTO. From the very beginning to when you started building to since we've switched off and worked with other engineers on the side, you've always been a fractional. At the same time, thankfully, I've been bootstrapped. I've never been in an absolute hurry for anything. So, as I've always said, look, we've got all the patience in the world. We just have to do this thing right. And I've been really grateful for that. I know not everyone who we ever get a chance to work with has that same level of tolerance, depending on where they are in their life and ambitions. But needless to say, I think there was a long stretch of time in which, despite all the patience that there may be in the world, I could never escape this anxiety of like, when are we going to be done?
Yeah.
And in particular, I can remember even being overzealous from a marketing standpoint as to like, oh, we're right around the corner. Like, it's almost done. We're 70% of the way there. We're 90% of the way there. And it just felt like every time we're still, even now, we're dealing with Google verification issues that are making it just slightly less fun to try to bring people into an onboarding experience. There were non-release blocking bugs, things that we felt that weren't going to break the bank, but that we wanted to get resolved. Those still had to be checked over and through. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Can you speak to, from your perspective, like what has it been like to recognize the sort of the pace of development and the expectations that a founder could have versus what they should have, and how to make amends?
Well, I would say in our journey, there's been a lot of tumultuous, or a lot of change in availability of you and I in the lifetime of this product. I'll always say it takes way longer than you expect, always. And I'll always say, Yeah, like maybe I'm gonna see if there's a good. I think there's a good quote here from Mike Tyson: "Is no one expects to be punched in the face. You're not gonna even know where you're gonna get hit. It's gonna happen." And also, we have brought in engineers and talent and product from some external places that weren't really aligned with what we were looking for, especially in the spirit of the product. So that also took some extra time. I would just say my advice for people would be build a team that you can count on and understands that what the end goal is. And when you ask for again, this is like a data driven thing. When you ask for an estimate, if you're trying to give an estimate, try to drill down as hard as you can. Like, hey, I have to build we need to make sure that our feedback system is working. What does that look like? Well, we need the infrastructure. How long is that infrastructure going to take? I have to write probably 10 classes of code, right? And then I have to deploy it, right? So that's going to take me a day because this, or maybe writing those 10 classes is going to take me 6 hours, and deploying is going to take me 4 hours at best. At worst, it'll take me 12. I do recall sort of when I became more of a full-time contractor, when we were supplying those estimates, they were pretty much dead on, which was really nice. Or at least the other thing that I think I need to like escalate or underscore is the right word to anybody watching this is when you ask a developer how long something's going to take and they say a day, you need to ask them, is that a real piece of time? Or are you saying 8 dev hours? Dev hours is something way different. 8 dev hours assumes 8 hours of uninterrupted, fully focused work. You can, if you're going to be working 8 hours in a day, it is not possible to do 8 dev hours. You need to eat. You have meetings. You may go for a walk. I don't know. And these things take away from your focus. But I do recall when we were supplying estimates, especially to, let's just say in the last 8 months, we were pretty much dead on for how long things would take. And we had a best case and a worst case scenario.
All in all, I think my experience on this side of the table was, it was fascinating uncovering just the amount of task work that really gets into software development. I mean, if you want to sort of start batching out just you could sort of create 3 buckets for yourself as a founder. You could say, number 1, you're going to put together a list out a bunch of requirements. That's all of your product management work. Then you're going to transfer that information and go talk with the UX user. That's a whole other bucket of just designing and approving and reviewing those designs, and then just meticulously making sure that every single one of those components matches up with every single one of your requirements, right? You're essentially approving the design before the actual development occurs. Because then you get to the actual development, and now you have, again, the third bucket, the third round. And that's going to include not just, hey, is my front-end capabilities working, but are these back-end capabilities working? Is everything working up to par? And now I'm going to do quality assurance. Now I have to go test. And now I have to set an expectation on a weekly basis of like, what's going to get fixed this week. And it just, to your point, it takes so much more time than you could possibly imagine. Because again, every little piece of this experience is being accounted for.
Right.
You really are creating something almost from nothing. And you have to understand that any little assumption that you make about how something works has to actually exist. Otherwise, your assumption may as well just be a bug you're going to have to fix later.
Yeah.
Because it's not there, or it's there and it's not there in the right way. And all of a sudden you're going to have to come to terms with the fact that, you weren't as crystal clear about what you thought you wanted until you actually saw it face to face.
Right. And so there's like a lot of different schools of thought on how you can do this, right? At times, Conrad, you probably felt like you were, in a giant intersection with a flag of stop, go, so that everybody get there, right?
I have my little orange jacket on. Like, please don't run me over.
But Conrad, I do want to underscore you were lucky because everybody that you brought in, and this is just a testament to maybe your hiring skills or maybe your friendships, everybody who was there was like, hey, I am interested in getting this deliverable done for Conrad. A lot of times it's not so easy. For example, when JT has a question or I had a question, we'd immediately contact you, right? This is something that is kind of, so a little bit of an explanation here. There's this term in software development called Agile, which basically means effectively something. It's a process of how to build software, and
It's a meta.
yeah, it's like a meta of how you should build the software. That wasn't good enough because nobody applied it. So they created this thing called extreme programming, which is basically, no, we're serious this time. This is really agile. And we're lucky we actually did a little bit of that, where basically you were effectively co-located with us because of Slack or availability. We're saying, Conrad, I think this blue looks terrible on this page because there's another blue on the next page. Should I, what should we do? And you'd say, make them both the same blue or make them both green. It's just a simple example.
On the spot problem fix. But you're right. Less for, color scheme choices and more for, hey, this particular functionality is working like this, and I think this is a problem. Here's why. Can you come give me a solution right on the spot?
Right. And the other thing that's cool about this is it really allows you to say, Ben, I don't care about the color scheme right now. I really think that what's more important is for us to make sure that the emails are properly formatted in Loop. And it's like, okay, so that's a trade-off, right? So we're going to abandon this work for now, or at least put it in the future. And we're going to focus on the core experience, which I believe is the right decision here, but we're going to focus on this core experience more. So that's what's really nice.
There's something here again that kind of I really liked that in those decision choices, there was also documentation dedicated to recognizing, hey, this has been put away, this has been prioritized. Granted, I live in a world where I try to be incredibly graceful with project and task documentation, as well as the management and sort of hindsight and self-awareness of when I made a decision, I want to remember, or at least put down, that I made this choice, so that if I have to come back to it, I have nobody to blame but me.
Yeah.
But then that brings us back to how, even through this process of how we work together, we dedicated ourselves to that fidelity as well. And again, it's part of the taxation of time itself. It's an administrative cost, but it's worth its weight in gold.
Yeah. Yep. Totally. We've done a lot of really good work here. We've tackled issues together. We figured out what's the best solution for you. I think it's also important to note, just for anybody who's interested, whenever you have an issue with your client, you do not just tell them you have an issue. You come with them with at least one solution, hopefully two, right? And then you tell them the pros and cons, because that's what you pay me for, not to tell you your problems. It's to tell you your problems and help you figure out what you want, how you want to solve it.
Yeah, be a problem solver, not a problem introducer and generator, and don't do anything else with that.
Yeah.
Ben, I know we're running short on time. I want to again express my thanks on how far we've come and how we've ultimately reached this point in the Loop software development cycle where we have a release. It's amazing. It's not without it's just like honestly, it's not without its depression moments where you're like, all right, I'm done. Now what? And the truth is, there's a lot. There's a lot more to do. But even now, I know that whenever we're ready to pick back up where we left off, and I say that because right now the primary focus of the product is, go get feedback, go see how things are going, right? Why continue going down? And this is both just good business decision making and you being like, what matters most is the product's success, not whether or not I am consistently move forward on something. It'd be nice if there was a world where I had plenty of capital and product market fit to be able to push me to ask you for more time and help. But at the same time, it's cool to know that you're like, look, this is the thing that matters most to you right now. Conrad, go focus on that. In the meantime, we can still keep you updated about, hey, this is what the next release cycle is supposed to look like. And you already have this foundational understanding of like, I've built this product to be able to take on those new requirements.
Right.
Because we've already talked about them a little bit ahead of time. We maybe haven't sort of fleshed them all out into fine detail, but we know how to do that. We've gotten to that point. We become skilled enough as a team where I, as the owner, JT as a PM, Daphne as a designer, you as a developer, like we can sort of go back into that system and continue our process. With all that said, what are your thoughts on the future of, I guess, this project, and how does that translate into the nature of the way you think when you're delivering your service?
Well, I would say I want to say thank you for involving me with this, because it's been a lot. I've learned a lot in this. I also want to say, so I'm very excited about this because we have, after getting rid of some of the technology that was burdensome. We now have a technology that's very, very fast to deploy, very flexible, and is unopinionated in spots where it shouldn't be. So as an example, I foresee workflows changing in the future and new workflows being added for emails. We've created a rule engine for this effectively, or we've created a foundation of a paradigm of a rule engine. And that's really exciting. So I think that you have a lot to look forward to. I also want to say, we have some work to do. I'm very lucky that I was able to perform, system architecture audits in my previous career, or my previous experiences in my career. So I can tell you where your blind spot is and how critical or how critical it is. I'm pretty sure a couple of days ago we had a bug that was it was my fault that was causing a relatively big issue in one of the features, and I told you, listen, I messed this up, but the reason why this took so long is because we need observability in our system, which is a core tenet of what I would just say ops or operations of a system. So we have a lot of what we need to move forward, and we know what we're missing. All we need is time, data, and hopefully customer traffic, and we'll know where to pivot. So I think compared to a lot of other projects I've seen, Conrad, your service is in a lot of a better shape than what I see most startups. You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, granted, hey, look, I'm not saying that we've developed the right answer here, but I do feel that based on the principles of, what does a good operation look like, I'm just very grateful to have gone through all of this and felt like, all right, like, I think everything's well accounted for. And I hate to say how little I knew about that, and as a result, how little I was actually doing about that when I first got started in software development. It should truth be told, for the sake of being humble to my former self. You didn't know what you didn't know. I didn't know what I didn't know. So God help me, but now I know better.
Yeah.
And now I not only understand the expectations that I need to have in order for the system of creation and development in the software landscape to be successful, but now I can also rely on it in such a way that I know the system's going to look after us because we've built it in such a way that it has its own checks and balances and just procedures for accountability, not necessarily just in the personal sense of like who's going to be responsible for what, but also what is there to be accountable for.
Yeah. Well, I think, Conrad, out of all of this, the greatest thing you have gotten so far, it might be maybe you get 1 million customers, and now this thing really, you can go live in, I don't know, Spain or Argentina or whatever, maybe in the Maldives. I don't know. But
I hear Spain removed the whole buy a house, get a visa deal, so that may be off the cards for us, right?
Drat. But I will say, I think that the greatest thing you've got out of this was now you know what it's like. Now you know why I said don't build it. Right?
Yes, I
Now
look
you
back
know
on that moment.
right. And I think, what we did was, I think this may not pay you right now, but maybe later in Loop or some other venture, you have clarity on understanding, oh, okay, so I need to manage my development, my UX, or my programmers, my UX, my product, and I have to manage these other dependencies and these streams of work. And I know this is all going to take this amount of time. I know that this developer is actually moving very fast. This developer seems to be moving very slow. I think in the future, if you begin to bring on more talent, you may have to understand how to incentivize developers who may not be performing at 100%, and that's a different problem. But right now, I think the greatest thing you've got was now you know why I said don't build it.
Speaking of bringing on more talent, I do look forward to a time in which Loop success in its own right allows for a more robust development team in kind. But on a similar token, Ben, I know that you're hungry for more opportunities yourself. What are some of the ways in which people who are listening in, how can they find you? How can they contact you?
Yep.
And when should they be reaching out to you?
Yeah, I would say the earlier the better. I am in the process of building a website, which will be bikebelt.io, but my email is ben@bikebelt.io. I have a link that I'm sure we can share that in the post of this. But yeah, that's the best way to contact me. I can probably help people understand what they're really asking for when they say I want an AI that does that helps me. I want to be able to buy cats with AI. I could probably help them understand what they really mean by that. I can help them build it. I can help them basically, if they have a team, I can help them understand what really are the steps to get this out the door and what about the day after the release, right? Like, how do we know that our system's working? How do we know our system is failing gracefully? Things like that. How are we going to add new features quickly and in a modular way?
I know you've already accepted introductions for reducing costs on folks, development maintenance in terms of the types of applications they're using and uh, how those, I don't know if they're what you call them, utilities within the nature of software, but whether it's like the cost of database space or server access and how those particular products
Yeah.
are charging. I've seen you do that. We've made those intros. We've talked about obviously parties like myself who are in the process of building an application, but maybe they have an existing talent team, and yet that talent team may be very junior. And so they may be looking for someone who's a little bit more senior who can set certain expectations surrounding, I always like to call them foresters, people who see the forest through the trees,
Yeah.
right? And no difference in software development on that end. I think you call it the staff engineer role.
Yeah, I think that's probably a best description of it because it's staff engineer is like really tackling organization wide issues and not just on a team.
Yeah. But in any case, I think the spirit of your introduction is more often than not going to be I'm looking for some practical software engineering advice.
Yeah, that's what I'm here for. I mean, you're the guy driving the boat. I'm just the guy in the crow's nest saying that there's an iceberg 100 feet ahead. Yeah,
The Titanic could have really used you back then.
yeah, I know.
Um, whether they would have listened, different argument.
That's very true.
Ben, thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks.